sometimes people will say, well, what's a weak point? How do you train a weak point? And I say, well, you got to prioritize it. And so there's two ways that I look at it to prioritize something. There's one,
There's a question here that's asking about how you structure your block training, and in between questions we discussed this a little bit. And you really don't do a block style of training. You said it was more of a mixture of linear with conjugate. Generally, how do you structure your training?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm preparing for a competition or if I'm like pretty far out from a competition, I mean, I'll sort of structure it in sort of like, phases of weeks and stuff that I have general goals for. But I think most of the time when I'm training, it's a little more like conjugated training. There's a degree of linear periodization where I'm going from lighter, earlier on in the training to heavier, closer to the meet, more specific, closer onto the meet. The only things I do that are strictly like blocks, where I'd say this is just like a 4-week block. One thing might be like kind of like a deload after a meet where I'll train without a belt just to kind of put less weight on my spine. That's pretty simple. You just kind of do what I feel like for, no more than 4 weeks. One that I've been doing, I did 2 times last year, which worked really well for me, was I did a 4-week wave of pause deadlifts. And the basic training cycle for that was, you go 60%, 65, 70, 75% for the 4 weeks. And then the reps are like 6 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, 5 sets of 4, 4 sets of 4. So it's a pretty simple structure. The idea of doing it is basically you're just getting a lot of time under tension, you're building up a lot of volume, and this is just one of the workouts that I did each week. So what that was basically doing is a weak point I wanted to address was lower back strength and muscle. So doing that was basically a way to just put a lot of weight on my lower back for a lot of time under tension. It coupled well with some of the other things I was doing during that phase, and during the entire 4 weeks, my back was just like sore all the time.
Yeah.
And it felt like I put a ton of strength on. At the end of that, it took me a week of kind of almost like doing a deload workout unintentionally. Like basically like, my next deadlift day was like I go up heavy and it's like pretty friggin' beat. And then a week after that, because of the deload, then I started hitting some really good PRs. So it's basically just a really good strength and hypertrophy kind of block, if you will.
Looking at the overreaching philosophy that you have, kind of mixing the linear with the conjugate, how long have you been using that? And I'm using the word overreaching because you have those little microcycles that you just talked about, which fall within there. But how long have you been using that overreaching type of philosophy?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for a long time. The little blocks are, I wouldn't say that's so critical, because those are things that happen like almost like an off season, like before a training cycle starts, because that's too fatiguing to do that during a training cycle. And doing like a beltless phase before a meet, to me, that's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
But when I build up, the way I like to think about, is linear. I'm kind of steadily building up my main lifts towards competition. As far as like more of a conjugated thing where I'm focusing on different goals, maybe different exercises that address different weak points, like a, leg drive and a deadlift or lockout strength. I kind of format it in sort of the classic, like, you could call it DUP, you could call it like heavy, light, medium. But basically training, each lift or variation. I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 lifts or 5 lifts that I want to hit in a week. And in my experience, each of those lifts has sort of like an ideal training parameter. Like, is it better to do this one for sets of 3 or sets of 6? Or so in kind of the sense of DUP, you can say, well, this is the exercise I do for triples. This is the exercise I do for 6s. And whether it's like the same day or 3 different days, I mean, I always kind of approach that. So for me, for deadlifts, I train my back 3 times a week. Friday is the day where I go heavy with pretty high volume. Monday, I squat and I do stiff legs or RDLs afterwards. So that's kind of like moderately heavy. It's just as intense, but the weight that I put on when I do sets of 5 or 6 or 8, it's not as heavy as what I do on the pulls off the floor. Then the third day is I've been doing like a bent over row or like bodybuilding day on Tuesday. So this is, relatively speaking, it's a light day.
Yeah.
When I do rows, it might be 400 pounds or something in that range, but that's a lot less than 600 pound stiff legs or 700 pound deadlifts.
Yeah.
So you get the heavy, light, medium, where the heavy day is pretty good volume, the medium day is light volume, and the light day is high volume. Because I'll do rows and pull-ups and all sorts of, bodybuilding type back training. So again, 3 times a week, training the lower back. And, you know, if I did squats, a lot of times I do the same thing. So I'll have, you know, low bar squats, high bar squats, and front squats kind of all in the same week. I do them on 2 days, not 3, but that's just how I've organized it for most of the time.
So let's say that you've been using this type of methodology
Yeah.
for 6 years.
Yeah.
What were you doing before that?
You know, when I first started training for powerlifting, I sort of followed, you know, the best program I could glean from, you know, what Louis Simmons put together, West Side Training. So I would do speed days, and I would do max effort days, and then I would do a couple of days where I would just come in and do like high rep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I was like single, didn't have any kids.
Yeah.
So I'd go to the gym like 10 to 11 times a week if, you know, if I had the time for it. You know, 4 main workouts, 2 kind of like dumbbell workouts, and then other workouts on top if I felt like it. So that helped my deadlift a lot. And I feel like one of the things that I really took away that was good is there's just training my upper back, like rows and pull-ups almost every single workout. So this could be like 6 times a week a lot of times. And I did that for about 2 years. And so that really helped me build up a lot of upper back strength, a lot of rear delt training. And so that's kind of a cool thing that I learned from that, because, you know, I look at it, you know, sometimes people will say, well, what's a weak point? How do you train a weak point? And I say, well, you got to prioritize it. And so there's 2 ways that I look at it to prioritize something. There's one, if something's like an exercise that's beneficial, then put it first on its own day so you can really put energy into it. So front squats were like that for me. But the way I train the upper back, where it's like I'm training it every day, well, that kind of goes back to like the Arnold Schwarzenegger calves
Volume,
kind of thing. It's like, well, if my calves are my weak point, I'm training them every day.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's first or not, but I'm gonna do it every day. And, you know, that's the other way to prioritize something. It's like, you know, train it every day.
Well, what it sounds like, listening to you talk about your training throughout the history, is you kind of follow some kind of global template, you know, Louis stuff, kind of putting it together. And then over the period of a bunch of years, you made a lot of fucking mistakes, you know, figured some things out here, figured this, you know, this worked, this didn't work, this worked, this didn't work. And so then 6 years ago, you basically figured out, hey, this is what works for me.
Yeah.
So this is my global template now. And then you start rotating different things into that template where you kind of know what to do before the meet. Like that's, you know, that structure. And then in the off seasons where you're like, oh, let's try this after you deload.
Sure.
So you deload, then in the off season, you're like, oh, let's try this, see how that works. So that's like your testing grounds to be able to see what comes in to the new thing.
I think any lifter has to be able to learn what works for them.
Yes.
And not be afraid to sort of like say, I know everyone says to do this, but when I do it this way, it feels good. Let me do a little more of that, you know?
That's what I was trying to extract and did extract out of you throughout this whole question is, you know, everybody wants to find that perfect program, but that perfect program is only found by making a lot of mistakes and having a lot of successes and paying attention to your own, you know, undulating daily periodization, how you feel during the day, because you're making adjustments every day. You know, every warm-up set, you know, if you go into, say, you said you front squat and it might be the first exercise, and you might be thinking, I'm going to do 600 for each, right? But you get under the first set, you're like, ooh, fuck. I'm not really too sure, you know, so there might be 20, 25 decisions that are made until you get up to that point.
I always like a blend of like the best of both worlds. So whether it's, you know, the workout is like delineated to a T, or am I just going to come in and be like completely instinctive? Like the two extremes don't work for me. Let me have a plan and then let me go from there.
Well, it's tough too, because if you have that plan and you're warming up and it's not going according to plan, you just get pissed.
Yeah.
And you're like, fuck it, I'm going to make it happen anyhow, which is really what you're not supposed to do. But
yeah, the problem is, you know, that works once and then maybe it works twice, but then eventually it doesn't work. So
then you break down.
The plan has some flaws. You got to have recalibrated the plan.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to be critical enough with your own thinking to be able to know when to pull back. And I think most people at your level don't do it enough.
Yeah, and then what I've learned through experience is like, say front squats, you know, I've learned that when I do them really heavy, like doubles or triples, doesn't get what I need out of it. If I do sets of 5 to 8, I get good progress. I get the form stays pretty consistent. I get better as I go. I build up muscle mass from it, and that's something I've learned. If I were to do more than 8 reps, I don't want to do that anyway. But that's not heavy enough. So I've kind of figured out, okay, this is just practical application experience speaking. You know, this is the ramp range that works good. Not, you know, triples because someone said I should do it. Just
exactly.
5 to 8 works good, and that's what works for me. And I'll do heavy ones if I feel like it, after the volume. I've also learned that if I do front squats for about 6 weeks, I can expect that that's about how long I'll get strong for. You know, week 7 or 8, it's that point where it's like I could plan it out to do that, but there's probably the stimulus is going to be gone. I'm going to probably start plateauing, and if I just force it, it's not going to help anything anyway. So I usually kind of plan it, and then when I get to the end, hopefully I've made a little bit of progress on my front squat. You know, if I train it 6 weeks in a row, I figure, you know, 4 weeks kind of builds up. 5 and 6 is where I see some PRs from it, and then, you know, if I'm doing great, yeah, I'll just keep going, fine. But if I get to that point and I'm like, I want to do more, but it seems like it's stalling out. It probably is stalling out, and I should probably not try to force it to just keep working. It's like so I think some of the secondary exercises are good like that, where you can do them for several weeks, but not forever.
Yes.
And kind of adapt,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
so.
the primaries are harder.
Yeah.
To be able to rotate. That was good, because I think a lot of people get too set in what they're doing, and they don't advance and become as good as they could become, because they don't trust themselves. You know, which is really what it comes down to.
It's a big thing to be able to like say, you know what, this really smart person has this plan, but I'm going to change it.
Yeah, I mean, even with your...
But also beginners change it too quick.
Yeah, and I'm sure when you're talking to Stan, you know, you have your own ideas about nutrition that's worked for you throughout the past that you're throwing out, saying, hey, look, you know, and... Or maybe not, who the fuck knows, but nutrition's a different thing for a lot of us. Just tell me what to fucking eat.
Yeah, no, Stan, I'm like, he tells me what to eat, and it works pretty good, and he explains enough of it where I like understand it to the point where it's not just like blind faith, and I'm like, oh, that sounds weird.
Increasing hip mobility for the sumo deadlift and cues for sitting, this would be interesting, cues for sitting back in the sumo deadlift, or I will throw in there, should you be sitting back in the sumo deadlift? So let's go with the hip mobility first.